The jewelry Princess Diana once wore has always been more than sparkling ornaments. It is a legacy, a bridge between the people's princess and her sons, and a symbol of trust that the world thought would remain untouchable. But imagine the shock, the betrayal, the disbelief, when whispers emerged that these treasures were no longer safe within the family. At the center of this storm, Meghan Markle. And the breaking point came when Prince Harry allegedly discovered she had been attempting to sell off pieces of his late mother's priceless collection. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The Montecito mansion that once stood as a sanctuary for Harry and Meghan suddenly transformed into the stage of an explosive confrontation. To Harry, Diana's jewelry was sacred, a reminder of his mother's love and her tragic absence. These heirlooms were not mere possessions. They were part of his very identity. For him to uncover that Meghan may have crossed the line and treated them as bargaining chips in a world of wealth and influence, it was a wound deeper than any headline could capture. The world has often speculated about financial strains and the couple's constant tug-of-war between independence and opulence. But nothing could prepare Harry for this discovery. Sources suggest the confrontation was fierce, raw, and emotional. Meghan, cornered by Harry's fury, tried to explain her side, but it was too late. The trust had been fractured, perhaps beyond repair. In that moment, Harry allegedly made the decision that would send shockwaves through their marriage. He told Meghan to leave their Montecito home. This isn't just a story about jewelry. It's about legacy, betrayal, and the breaking point of a marriage already under the world's microscope. What happens when personal ambition collides with sacred family memory? And what does it mean for the future of Harry and Meghan, who once promised to rewrite the royal script, but now find themselves in the middle of a scandal too personal to ignore? Stay with us, because what comes next could change everything. There are some stories that live far beyond the grave, stories that are stitched into the fabric of history not because of their material worth, but because of what they represent. Princess Diana's jewelry collection is one of those stories. To the average person, a ring or a necklace may simply be an accessory. But to Diana, and later to her sons, these pieces were intimate symbols of her life, her loves, and her struggles. They are heirlooms that whisper of royal duty, the price of fame, and the strength of a woman who carried the world's expectations on her shoulders while navigating her own battles in private. In this chapter, we dive deep into the origins, the meaning, and the power behind this extraordinary collection that now finds itself at the center of scandal. When Diana entered the royal family, her jewelry collection began with a mix of gifts and pieces loaned to her by Queen Elizabeth II. It was customary for royal brides to receive items from the crown's vast treasure. Yet Diana's collection grew beyond tradition. It became an extension of her personality. She was known for reimagining how jewelry was worn, sometimes using chokers as headbands or mixing high jewels with casual outfits. Each choice she made spoke of rebellion cloaked in grace. The famous sapphire engagement ring, chosen by Diana herself from a Garrett catalog rather than a custom royal design, was an early example of how she broke protocol. At the time, it was criticized for being too accessible, too ordinary for a princess. Today, that same ring, sitting on Catherine Middleton's hand, is one of the most recognizable rings in the world and a timeless symbol of Diana's legacy. Her jewelry told a story even in her darkest days. After her separation from Prince Charles, Diana began to favor bold, striking pieces. It was as though she used jewelry as armor, stepping into public life with gems that glistened with resilience even as the media hunted her down. The aquamarine cocktail ring, for instance, which she wore after her divorce, was not just a gemstone. It was a declaration of independence, a sparkling rebuttal to a life of being defined by her marriage. This was a woman reclaiming her narrative in diamonds, pearls, and stones. For her sons, these pieces became relics of memory. After her untimely death, her will outlined her desire for her jewelry to pass down to William and Harry. The idea was simple but profound. She wanted her sons to share these symbols of love with the women they would one day marry. It was a mother's last gift, a reminder that even if she would not be there to see their weddings or meet her grandchildren, her spirit would live on through tokens she had once treasured. This is why the jewelry has always been more than stones and gold. To Harry, every piece is a fragment of his mother's heartbeat, a way of keeping her close. Among the pieces Harry cherished most was the sapphire and diamond engagement ring, which initially was his choice before he lovingly gave it to William so that Catherine could wear it. In exchange, Harry took other keepsakes, including a gold Cartier watch Diana had worn often. Meghan would later be photographed wearing this very watch, sparking conversations about how closely she was tying herself to Diana's legacy. Harry saw it as a connection, but it also raised questions. Was this connection being honored or exploited? The importance of these jewels is amplified when one considers how Diana used them to communicate. Royals are trained to remain silent, to let gestures and appearances do the talking. Diana mastered this art. A tiara could mean compliance with royal expectations, while a sapphire choker paired with a bold gown could mean defiance. When she stepped into the Serpentine Gallery in 1994 wearing her now iconic revenge dress and a massive pearl and sapphire choker, the world understood without words that she was reclaiming her power. Jewelry, for Diana, was language, and every piece carried a message. Now, imagine this legacy, laden with emotional resonance and historical value, being mishandled. Imagine a collection that once spoke of strength, compassion, and rebellion being quietly packaged and sold. This is why Harry's alleged discovery hit him with such force. To him, the jewels weren't just property. They were sacred. They represented his mother's sacrifices, her vulnerability, her attempt to give her sons something permanent in a world that constantly shifted beneath their feet. They represented a promise that no matter what happened in the chaos of royal life, her memory would remain untouchable. For many royal watchers, Diana's jewels remain symbols of hope. They are displayed in books, exhibitions, and documentaries, always surrounded by reverence. When Meghan wore Diana's butterfly earrings and gold bracelet during her first royal tour with Harry, the world took note. It was meant to symbolize continuity, to show Diana's presence blessing their journey. But as we now explore the events that unfolded in Montecito, that symbolism begins to feel tainted. Instead of continuity, there is rupture. Instead of blessing, there is betrayal. Jewelry, unlike words, cannot be forgotten. It can be locked away, displayed, or, in the wrong hands, sold. This is why Diana's collection stands at the heart of this scandal. It was never about money. It was about meaning. The weight of a necklace or a ring lies not in carats, but in memory, and that is something Harry knows better than anyone. This first chapter is not just about stones and metals. It is about why the alleged betrayal cut so deeply, and why it may have marked the beginning of the end for a marriage once presented as a fairy tale. And so we close this chapter with the most pressing question of all. If Diana's legacy, carefully preserved in these jewels, could be treated as a commodity, what else could be at risk? The answer to that question will unfold in the chapters that follow, as we examine Meghan's relationship with this legacy and the decisions that would shake Montecito to its core. When Meghan Markle entered Prince Harry's life, the shadow of Princess Diana was never far away. For Harry, his mother's memory was sacred, a compass guiding him through decisions about love, marriage, and his place in the world. For Meghan, Diana represented both inspiration and burden. She was often compared to the late princess, sometimes celebrated as her modern successor, other times criticized for seemingly borrowing Diana's image to shape her own narrative. This complicated connection became most visible through Diana's jewelry, where sentiment, symbolism, and suspicion intertwined in ways few could have predicted. From the very start, Meghan's introduction to Diana's collection was a deeply personal gesture. Harry, eager to connect his mother's spirit with his new love, presented Meghan with Diana's aquamarine cocktail ring on the night of their wedding reception. The image of Meghan stepping into their post-ceremony party wearing the large, icy blue gemstone became a defining moment. For many, it felt like Diana was present, blessing the union of her youngest son. The symbolism was powerful, and the photographs traveled the world. But that night also planted a seed. Meghan was no longer just an actress turned duchess. She had become a living extension of Diana's memory, wearing pieces that millions of people believed belonged as much to history as they did to Harry. Over the following months, Meghan appeared at various royal engagements adorned with other pieces once belonging to Diana. On their royal tour of Australia, she wore Diana's butterfly earrings and a gold bracelet, reportedly given to her by Harry as tokens of continuity. The public, enamored with the newlyweds, celebrated these moments as touching tributes. Yet beneath the admiration, whispers began. Some asked whether Meghan was truly honoring Diana or using her legacy as a shield, a way to anchor herself within the royal narrative despite her controversial introduction into the family. The dynamic only grew more complicated with the media's relentless comparisons. Headlines referred to Meghan as the new Diana, drawing parallels between Diana's battles with the press and Meghan's own grievances. Meghan herself leaned into this narrative at times, speaking openly about feeling hounded and misunderstood. Critics claimed she sought to inherit not only Diana's jewelry, but also her global sympathy. Admirers argued that she was bravely channeling Diana's spirit to fight against the same institutional forces. Either way, Diana's presence loomed over Meghan's every step, and the jewelry became the most visible symbol of that presence. Harry, for his part, appeared determined to weave Diana into their marriage. He saw sharing his mother's heirlooms with Meghan as an act of love and trust. These weren't just adornments. They were his way of making sure Diana remained part of his life's milestones. But what Harry viewed as sacred tokens, Meghan may have seen differently. For her, the jewels offered access. Access to Diana's aura, to public adoration, and to the authority of legacy in a family that had always treated her as an outsider. Wearing Diana's jewelry put her in direct alignment with one of the most beloved women of the 20th century. It allowed Meghan to claim legitimacy in a world that often resisted her. As Meghan's relationship with the royal family soured, however, the meaning of Diana's jewelry began to shift. The pieces no longer appeared solely in celebratory moments. They became part of Meghan's personal arsenal. Photographs of her wearing Diana's Cartier watch or Diana's gold bracelet during interviews and appearances after leaving royal duties were not accidental. Every image was a statement. Even as Meghan distanced herself from the monarchy, she remained tethered to its most powerful figure, Diana. By adorning herself with Diana's heirlooms in public settings, Meghan reminded the world that she, too, carried a piece of the beloved princess with her, regardless of titles or official duties. But this connection had a cost. Within the royal household, questions surfaced about Meghan's intent. Was she protecting Diana's memory or exploiting it? Every appearance sparked debate. Some insiders reportedly viewed Meghan's frequent use of Diana's jewelry as calculated, a deliberate move to cloak herself in borrowed legitimacy. Others argued it was Harry who offered the pieces and that Meghan merely honored his wishes. Still, the perception grew that Meghan was intertwining herself with Diana's legacy for reasons that were not always purely sentimental. Consider the weight of the Cartier watch. Diana had worn it frequently, a timeless symbol of elegance and independence. When Meghan wore it in her high-profile interviews with Oprah Winfrey, the message was unmistakable. Here she was, presenting her truth against the monarchy, adorned with the same watch Diana had once worn as she spoke of her own struggles. For Meghan, this was more than an accessory. It was a visual alignment, a way to tell the world she was fighting Diana's fight. Yet for critics, it was another example of Meghan appropriating Diana's legacy to frame her own battles as historically inevitable. The jewelry also created an invisible competition between Meghan and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Catherine's engagement ring, Diana's iconic sapphire, instantly linked her to the late princess. Meghan, by wearing other pieces, seemed to step into that same narrative. The public compared their styles relentlessly, debating who wore Diana's memory more gracefully. What was meant to be a mother's gift to her sons became, in the eyes of many, a contest of legacy between the women who had married them. The tension only deepened as Meghan's public image fractured. The couple's departure from royal duties, their explosive interviews, and the constant back and forth with the media changed how people viewed Meghan's connection to Diana's jewelry. What once appeared touching now seemed, to some, opportunistic. Every piece of jewelry became a battlefield of perception. Was Meghan the keeper of Diana's memory, or was she commercializing it for her own benefit? This is where the stakes of the alleged scandal come into focus. If Meghan truly did attempt to sell pieces of Diana's collection, the act was not just about money. It was about crossing a sacred boundary. To Harry, and to much of the public, Diana's jewelry represented purity, memory, and maternal love. Selling it would mean reducing his mother's legacy to a transaction. For Meghan, if desperation or calculation led her down that path, it revealed the darker side of her relationship with Diana's memory. The very connection that had once uplifted her became the source of suspicion and betrayal. The chapter of Meghan and Diana's jewelry is therefore more than history. It is a story of power, perception, and fragile trust. Every ring, every bracelet, every watch carried dual meanings: love for Harry and leverage for Meghan. To the outside world, these jewels sparkled with nostalgia. Inside Montecito, they may have been loaded with tension, arguments, and a weight that even diamonds could not bear. And so we leave this chapter with an unsettling question. When does honoring a legacy turn into exploiting it? The answer lies in what unfolded next, when the world of jewelry dealers, secret transactions, and hidden financial pressures collided with the fragile sanctuary Harry thought he had built in California. It was in that collision that the scandal truly took shape. When most people think of jewelry sales, they picture brightly lit showrooms, velvet-lined cases, and glamorous auctions broadcast live from Sotheby's or Christie's. But beneath the polished exterior of the luxury market exists a hidden world of private dealings, where priceless gems and historic heirlooms exchange hands far away from the eyes of the public. It is a world where discretion is valued more than display, where fortunes are made in whispers, and where the jewelry once belonging to icons like Princess Diana would be treated not only as treasure, but as cultural artifacts with unmatched allure. To understand why Meghan Markle's alleged attempt to sell pieces of Diana's collection created such outrage, one must first understand the mechanisms of this secretive trade. High-end jewelry dealing often begins in circles that few can enter. Unlike ordinary auctions, private sales are built on trust networks where reputation matters as much as money. Dealers and collectors guard their access fiercely, knowing that a single misstep can ruin careers. A necklace that once adorned a queen, a tiara passed down through centuries, or a ring linked to a famous romance. These are more than jewels. They are stories enshrined in stone and metal. And stories, when attached to an item, add immeasurable value. Diana's collection sits at the pinnacle of this phenomenon. Every sapphire, diamond, or pearl she wore carries not just craftsmanship, but the aura of a woman adored by millions and remembered as the people's princess. For collectors, the opportunity to own even a single piece would be irresistible. Transactions in this sphere are rarely straightforward. They are mediated through confidential meetings, sometimes in five-star hotels, sometimes in secure private offices. Documentation of provenance is essential, proving the piece's history and authenticity. Yet even in the most legitimate of circles, shadows lurk. There are those who specialize in acquiring items through questionable means, family disputes, financial desperation, or betrayal from within. These underground operators thrive because demand is endless and secrecy is part of the appeal. Buyers are often powerful individuals, oligarchs, sheiks, Hollywood moguls, or European aristocrats, who are willing to pay staggering sums to acquire not just jewelry, but legacy. For someone like Meghan, if she truly did consider entering this world, the stakes would have been immense. Unlike selling personal jewelry of her own, Diana's collection is enshrined in public consciousness. Even the hint that a piece was up for sale would raise eyebrows, sparking questions about ownership, legality, and morality. And yet, there are dealers who would have seen such an opportunity as the deal of a lifetime. A bracelet worn by Diana at a state banquet, or earrings she donned during her humanitarian missions, could fetch tens of millions in the right private circle. These values have little to do with the intrinsic worth of gold or diamonds. They are tethered to Diana's myth. Consider how collectors chase artifacts tied to Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, or Jackie Kennedy. The prices often defy logic. A strand of pearls worn by Jackie O once sold for over $200,000, though the pearls themselves were cultured and of modest monetary value. The allure came from her aura. With Diana, the effect is magnified tenfold. Her tragic death cemented her in history as a symbol of grace and vulnerability. Owning her jewelry is not just an indulgence. It is the ultimate claim to a piece of her story. And this is exactly why the market for such pieces, even if shrouded in secrecy, thrives with intensity. Inside Montecito, if Meghan truly engaged with whispers of such a sale, she would not have needed to post items on public platforms. Instead, she would have entered conversations through discreet intermediaries. High-end jewelry brokers exist to protect sellers from exposure, promising confidential connections to wealthy buyers. They manage everything, from authentication to transportation, ensuring that no fingerprints are left behind. For someone under scrutiny like Meghan, such channels might have appeared tempting. Yet it is precisely this temptation that made Harry's alleged discovery so devastating. He would have understood that selling even a single piece would be irreversible. Once Diana's jewelry entered private hands, it could vanish forever, tucked away in vaults, stripped from public memory. The hidden jewelry trade also thrives on one factor Meghan and Harry knew all too well: desperation. History is littered with stories of aristocrats pawning family treasures during financial crises. During the Russian Revolution, the Romanovs' jewels were smuggled out of the country and sold discreetly across Europe. Centuries earlier, European nobility often liquidated tiaras or necklaces to fund wars or repay debts. Even Queen Mary of the United Kingdom once pawned jewels in secret to cover expenses. To collectors, such desperation only enhances the thrill, owning what was once considered untouchable. Meghan, facing mounting financial pressures after the collapse of projects and media deals, may have found herself staring at Diana's collection not as heirlooms, but as opportunities. There is also the psychological element of control. Jewelry, unlike real estate or investments, can be easily concealed, transported, and liquidated. For Meghan, who often clashed with the restrictions of royal life, the idea of holding in her hands pieces of immense value, pieces she could theoretically turn into cash or leverage, may have represented a form of empowerment. Yet empowerment through betrayal is costly. Selling Diana's jewelry would not only have been a violation of Harry's trust, but also a public relations catastrophe, one that would turn even sympathetic observers against her. The secrecy of the jewelry world means many sales never see daylight. Only when pieces reappear at later auctions, or on the wrist of a new socialite, do questions arise. For Diana's jewelry, the appearance of a piece outside of royal circles would have been instantly noticeable. The public would not need auction records to recognize them. Photographs of Diana are too deeply imprinted in collective memory. This means that even entertaining the possibility of such a sale would have required extraordinary boldness or extraordinary recklessness. And yet, it is this hidden world that forms the backdrop of the Montecito scandal. Without understanding how easily heirlooms can vanish into private collections, one cannot grasp the depth of Harry's horror at the alleged betrayal. To him, this was not merely about jewels leaving a safe. It was about his mother's story being stolen, sold, and silenced in hidden rooms where money outweighed memory. It was about a legacy slipping beyond his reach, into hands that cared nothing for the tears those pieces once witnessed. The hidden jewelry trade has always walked a fine line between reverence and exploitation. Dealers speak of preserving history, but money always drives the transaction. For Harry, raised with the belief that Diana's memory was sacred, realizing that Meghan may have entered this shadowed world would have been unbearable. This chapter exposes why the alleged scandal is so much more than a domestic dispute. It ties into centuries of secret trades, lost treasures, and the age-old tension between legacy and profit. And so we move forward with this unsettling truth. The moment Diana's jewelry was even considered a commodity, it stopped being just about jewels. It became about betrayal on the deepest level. The next chapter will carry us into Montecito itself, where the tensions of daily life, financial strain, and crumbling trust set the stage for the confrontation that changed everything. When Harry and Meghan moved into their Montecito mansion, the world saw it as a grand escape, a palace in exile. The sprawling estate with lush gardens, expansive grounds, and private security seemed to promise peace after years of scrutiny and media pressure. On the surface, Montecito looked like the dream: sun-soaked afternoons, celebrity neighbors, and the freedom to build a new life away from the restrictions of Buckingham Palace. But as with so many stories cloaked in wealth and privilege, the exterior beauty masked an interior riddled with cracks. The tension inside the mansion would slowly grow, fueled by pressures that money and fame could not cure. It was in this environment of mounting stress that Harry's discovery about Diana's jewelry would erupt like fire meeting dry timber. Life in Montecito was supposed to be a fresh beginning. The couple had struck multi-million-dollar deals with streaming platforms, giving the impression of financial independence. They held on to the narrative of carving their own path, of rewriting what it meant to be royal in the modern world. But behind the glossy announcements lay uncertainty. Projects with Netflix and Spotify faced criticism, delays, and in some cases, cancellations. Promises of high-value content turned into mounting questions about delivery and audience interest. For a couple that had walked away from royal stipends and security, financial independence wasn't just symbolic, it was survival. And survival meant pressure. Money, or the lack of it, has always been a silent intruder in relationships, and in Montecito it grew louder with each passing month. The upkeep of their mansion alone cost millions annually. Staff salaries, private security, and the luxury lifestyle expected of them all drained resources faster than new deals could replenish them. Rumors swirled about growing debts, and whispers suggested that their carefully curated image of success was more fragile than the world assumed. For Harry, who had grown up surrounded by wealth, but never quite controlling it, this new reality was disorienting. For Meghan, who had fought her way through Hollywood and understood both the hustle and the fragility of fame, the pressure to keep their empire afloat was relentless. As the financial weight pressed down, personal tensions followed. Harry struggled with homesickness and lingering guilt over leaving his family. The rift with his brother William and father Charles haunted him, and the estrangement became heavier in moments of quiet reflection. Meghan, meanwhile, wrestled with the constant battle for public approval. Every appearance was scrutinized, every word dissected. For her, the jewelry became not just sentimental keepsakes, but visual tools, a way to craft a narrative of legitimacy in the face of hostility. But this symbolic use also strained Harry, who saw those pieces differently. For him, they were untouchable fragments of his mother's soul, not weapons in a media war. The Montecito home became a theater of unspoken conflict. On the outside, it hosted grand photo shoots and polished interviews, but within its walls, arguments reportedly grew sharper. Friends noticed Harry's frustration simmering beneath his usually composed exterior. Meghan, too, seemed increasingly defensive, often reminding Harry of the sacrifices she had made to join his world and then walk away from it. At times, the house that was meant to shield them from intrusion became a gilded cage, trapping them with unresolved resentments. It was in this context that Diana's jewelry collection became more than relics. They became symbols of the fault lines splitting their marriage. Harry would often look at those pieces and feel the presence of his mother, a reminder of promises and love he wanted to preserve. Meghan, however, may have begun to view them differently, not as relics, but as resources. Each piece was not only beautiful but immensely valuable, capable of resolving financial problems or funding new ventures. The difference in perspective was stark. To Harry, sacred; to Meghan, practical. That divergence, in an already tense environment, became explosive. The Montecito tensions were not confined to finances alone. The couple's standing among their celebrity peers was also under strain. Invitations grew fewer, support from some circles seemed lukewarm, and whispers circulated about whether the couple's constant battles with the royal family had alienated them from Hollywood elites. The very world they thought would embrace them began to show signs of fatigue. This social pressure fed into their private lives. Harry, unaccustomed to being anything less than the adored prince, struggled with fading goodwill. Meghan, determined to prove they belonged in elite circles, pushed harder, demanding strategies and appearances that would maintain their relevance. Each push pulled Harry further into exhaustion. Even their children, Archie and Lilibet, became part of the strain. Harry was fiercely protective of them, determined not to let them suffer the media glare that had hounded his mother. Meghan, while protective, also understood that their children's existence inevitably tied them to the public narrative. Balancing privacy with visibility became another battle in their household, yet another reminder that no matter how far they ran, the shadow of royal life followed them. It is against this backdrop that the scandal of Diana's jewelry sale feels almost inevitable. Montecito was not just a home, it was a pressure cooker. Every stressor added heat: financial uncertainty, fading popularity, marital disagreements, family estrangement. By the time Harry allegedly discovered that pieces of his mother's collection had been considered for sale, the environment was already primed for combustion. His fury was not born in isolation. It was the breaking point of months, perhaps years, of building pressure. In many ways, Montecito itself became symbolic of their struggles. What was meant to be a sanctuary turned into a mirror of everything they had tried to escape. Instead of freedom, there was surveillance, from paparazzi, from critics, and eventually, from within their own relationship. Instead of unity, there was division. Instead of peace, there was tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air of every room. The mansion became a silent witness to arguments whispered late at night, to Harry's longing for his past, and to Meghan's determination to shape a future on her terms. As this chapter draws to a close, one truth becomes clear. The jewelry scandal could not have erupted without the Montecito tensions setting the stage. It was not an isolated act, but the culmination of pressures that had built up until something had to break. When Harry confronted Meghan about the alleged sale, the explosion was not just about diamonds or sapphires. It was about every unspoken resentment, every clash of values, every fracture in their carefully constructed life. And so, Montecito, once seen as a paradise, becomes the setting of downfall. It is here, within walls meant to shelter, that trust unraveled. The next chapter will pull us directly into the moment of discovery, when whispers turned into accusations and Harry's heartbreak spilled into rage. What happened in that confrontation would define not only their marriage but their standing in the eyes of the world. Every scandal has a moment of ignition, that single second when suspicion turns into undeniable truth. For Harry, that moment came when he allegedly discovered Meghan's involvement in attempts to sell pieces from Princess Diana's jewelry collection. The discovery was not a simple accident. It was the product of an environment thick with tension, the culmination of months of unease where whispers of financial strain and personal ambition collided with his deepest emotional wound, the sanctity of his mother's legacy. This chapter unravels the slow build-up to that explosive discovery, the clues Harry may have noticed, the confrontation that followed, and the irreversible rupture it created in their marriage. The earliest sign, as some insiders suggest, came in the form of inconsistencies. Harry began noticing discrepancies in their finances. Despite lucrative contracts with major companies, there always seemed to be discussions about new income streams, new deals, and new ways to maintain their lifestyle. Meghan's restlessness with money was something Harry had grown accustomed to. After all, she had come from Hollywood, where survival often depended on hustling for the next opportunity. But when discussions veered toward liquidating assets, Harry reportedly grew uneasy. Assets to him meant investments or properties. To Meghan, the definition may have stretched further. The jewelry had always been a subject of reverence for Harry. He had explained countless times to Meghan how deeply he valued Diana's collection, how each piece carried memories too sacred to tarnish with casual use. Meghan had smiled, listened, and even reassured him. Yet, Harry began to sense subtle shifts in how she referred to the pieces. What he called treasures, she sometimes called resources. What he saw as heirlooms, she occasionally framed as burdens, tied too tightly to a past she wanted to escape. The discovery itself, according to whispers, came in the form of communication Harry was never meant to see. Some say it was an email left open. Others claim it was a conversation he overheard with a broker. A few reports suggest it may have been a trusted friend who tipped him off, alarmed by Meghan's discreet inquiries. However it unfolded, what matters is the effect. Harry realized that discussions about Diana's jewelry were no longer symbolic. They were transactional. Pieces he had sworn to protect, that he had promised to pass down to his children, were being positioned for sale in private circles. The shock hit him like a thunderclap. In that instant, it was not just about jewelry. It was about betrayal. Diana's death had left scars on Harry's soul that never healed, and those jewels were among the few tangible connections to her. To think that they could be converted into cash, stripped of their history, and handed over to strangers, it shattered him. It was not about the monetary value, but the emotional desecration. The act suggested to Harry that Meghan either did not understand or did not respect the depth of his bond with his mother. Either explanation was intolerable. Harry's mind likely raced through memories in those moments. He may have recalled Diana's sapphire engagement ring, once meant for him, now worn by his sister-in-law Catherine. He may have remembered the Cartier watch, the aquamarine ring, the butterfly earrings, all items he had shared with Meghan in good faith, as extensions of his mother's love. He had believed he was weaving Diana into their new life together. Now, that gesture seemed like a mistake, a trust misplaced. The confrontation was inevitable. Accounts suggest Harry approached Meghan directly, unable to contain his fury. His voice carried both grief and anger as he demanded explanations. For Meghan, the moment was equally fraught. She may have tried to justify her actions, perhaps framing it as a practical decision, perhaps insisting she had no intention of actually completing a sale, perhaps even denying outright. But Harry, already primed by months of tension in Montecito, was not in a place to entertain excuses. To him, the very act of considering such a sale was unforgivable. Witnesses close to the couple claimed the argument was one of their most explosive. Walls that had heard countless disagreements about media, money, and family now shook under the weight of Harry's anguish. He reportedly accused Meghan of betraying not only him, but also his mother's memory. Meghan, cornered, may have pushed back, accusing Harry of clinging too tightly to the past, of refusing to see the realities of their present struggles. The words exchanged that day were more than a quarrel. They were wounds, inflicted in the heat of betrayal, that would not easily heal. For Harry, the discovery crystallized something he may have feared but never wanted to face. That Meghan's connection to Diana was not rooted in reverence, but in utility. He had given her those heirlooms out of love, believing they would strengthen their bond. Instead, he saw them reduced to bargaining chips, stripped of sentiment, turned into currency. In his eyes, Meghan had crossed a line from which there was no return. The psychological weight of that realization cannot be overstated. Harry had spent his life guarding his mother's memory against exploitation. He had watched the tabloids feast on her private struggles, had witnessed her reduced to headlines and scandal. He had vowed to protect her legacy from being consumed again. Now, in his own home, in the woman he had trusted above all others, he found the same pattern repeating. To him, it was as if history was betraying him all over again, this time from within. The aftermath of the discovery spread like cracks in glass. Trust eroded. Conversations grew colder. Even moments of peace were overshadowed by the lingering awareness that something sacred had been threatened. The house in Montecito, already tense, became a battlefield of silence and suspicion. Friends noticed the shift, the absence of the warmth that had once defined the couple. Harry withdrew, Meghan grew defensive, and the divide widened. The discovery also raised practical questions. If Meghan had indeed opened doors into the secretive world of high-end jewelry dealing, who else now knew about the collection? Were there intermediaries already involved? Could pieces have been copied, valued, or even transported? For Harry, these questions gnawed at him. He wanted assurance that nothing had left their possession, but doubt clung to him like a shadow. Once the idea of betrayal is planted, it is difficult to uproot. This chapter of discovery is not merely about one argument or one decision. It is about the collapse of trust. It is about the moment when Harry, who had risked everything to build a life with Meghan, realized that the person he had trusted most could make choices that tore open his deepest wound. The jewelry scandal was not an isolated misstep. It was the trigger that revealed just how fractured their foundation had become. And so, from the ashes of discovery, a new reality emerged. Harry, fueled by grief and rage, would soon make a decision that altered their future forever. To him, throwing Meghan out of Montecito was not just a reaction. It was an act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to reclaim his mother's legacy from the brink of desecration. In the next chapter, we step into that raw, unforgettable moment. The confrontation itself, when betrayal and heartbreak collided in a storm that shook their marriage to its core. There are arguments in marriages that end with silence, some that end with compromise, and others that leave wounds so deep they redefine the relationship. For Harry and Meghan, the confrontation over Diana's jewelry collection was the latter. It wasn't a quarrel over trivial matters like household expenses or public appearances. This was a clash of values, of legacy, and of trust. When Harry confronted Meghan after discovering her alleged involvement in attempts to sell pieces of his mother's collection, the walls of their Montecito mansion bore witness to a storm unlike any they had faced before. This was the night when emotions boiled over, when betrayal was named aloud, and when Harry's heartbreak became impossible to ignore. The confrontation began not with shouting, but with a cold and deliberate silence. Harry had spent hours wrestling with what he had uncovered. His mind replayed the images of his mother, her jewelry glistening in the public eye, and the promises he had made to himself to preserve her memory. To see those heirlooms, even considered for transaction, ignited a fury in him that he struggled to contain. When he entered the room to face Meghan, his expression carried more than anger. It carried grief, the raw grief of a son whose mother's memory had been desecrated. Meghan, sensing the weight in his demeanor, braced herself. She had seen Harry angry before, had endured countless arguments about family, finances, and media coverage. But this was different. His voice trembled not with rage alone, but with a pain that was almost unbearable to hear. "How could you?" he demanded, his words heavy with disbelief. To Harry, it was not just a question of action, it was a question of loyalty. Meghan attempted to explain, her tone defensive yet measured. She insisted that discussions about the jewelry were not final, that she had never intended to actually let go of pieces without careful thought. She may have argued that financial pressures had forced her to consider options, that survival in their current world demanded sacrifices Harry refused to acknowledge. To her, it was practicality. To Harry, it was betrayal, pure and unfiltered. As the argument escalated, voices rose. Harry reminded Meghan of the nights he had lain awake as a child, clutching memories of his mother while the world picked apart her life. He reminded her of his promise that Diana's legacy would remain untouched, safeguarded for their children and for generations to come. Meghan countered with frustrations of her own. She accused him of living too much in the past, of allowing Diana's ghost to dominate their marriage. She questioned whether he had ever fully chosen her, or whether she had always been standing in the shadow of a woman long gone. The confrontation became more than an argument about jewelry. It became an indictment of their entire relationship. Every unspoken resentment came rushing to the surface. Meghan voiced her exhaustion over constant comparisons to Diana, the relentless expectation that she mirror a woman she could never truly become. Harry accused her of exploiting those very comparisons, of using Diana's memory when it suited her and discarding it when it didn't. Each accusation cut deeper, each word sharpened by months of underlying tension. Observers later claimed the argument could be heard throughout the mansion. It was raw, loud, and unrestrained. For Harry, this was the breaking point. His voice cracked as he told Meghan that Diana's jewelry was not hers to treat as collateral, not hers to consider selling, not hers to touch without reverence. To him, the act had crossed the line between partnership and violation. It was as though the person he had entrusted with his most sacred memories had betrayed them for fleeting advantage. Meghan, in turn, may have cried out that she was tired of living under rules written by a family that had cast them out. She may have argued that she had sacrificed everything, her career, her freedom, her reputation, only to be told she had no right to make decisions in their new life. Her words carried the sting of a woman who felt cornered, stripped of power, and yet determined to assert herself. The confrontation reached its climax when Harry, his voice filled with finality, told Meghan to leave. Accounts suggest the words were not spoken in haste, but with the chilling clarity of someone who had reached his limit. "Get out," he allegedly said, his eyes wet with tears. The house fell silent after that, the gravity of his command hanging in the air like a blade. For Meghan, the words may have landed as both a shock and a challenge. For Harry, they were the only way to reclaim what he felt had been stolen, not the jewelry itself, but the sanctity of his mother's memory. In the hours that followed, the mansion was split into two worlds. Harry retreated into himself, replaying the confrontation in his mind, tormented by the thought that the woman he had once believed to be his soulmate had shattered his trust. Meghan, isolated and furious, may have called friends or advisors, recounting the argument in her own terms, painting herself as misunderstood, perhaps even victimized. But no matter how either of them framed it, the damage was done. What made this confrontation so devastating was not just the words exchanged, but the unspoken acknowledgement that their marriage had entered uncharted territory. Until then, every scandal, every controversy, every feud with the royal family had been framed as them versus the world. But in this moment, the battle was not against outsiders. It was against each other. The jewelry scandal exposed the deepest fracture of all, that the bond they had claimed was unbreakable could, in fact, be broken from within. For Harry, the confrontation left him with a decision that carried consequences beyond his marriage. If Meghan had truly attempted to sell his mother's jewelry, he could never look at her the same way again. Every piece of Diana's collection would now carry the stain of betrayal, every glance at the jewels a reminder of this night. For Meghan, the confrontation revealed just how deeply Harry's past controlled his present. She may have felt that no matter what she did, she would always come second to Diana's memory. This was not a fight with a clean ending. There were no apologies that could erase the words, no explanations that could undo the damage. The confrontation lingered in the air long after voices went quiet, etched into the walls of Montecito like scars that would not fade. It was the moment when Harry and Meghan stopped being united in their struggle and became adversaries in their own home. And so, the confrontation stands as the turning point of this saga. It was the moment when private pain became public consequence, when the jewelry scandal transformed from whispers into a rupture too large to hide. The next chapter will carry us into the aftermath. The reactions within the royal family, the fury of William and Charles, and the ripple effect that would spread from Montecito across the globe, shaking the monarchy and the Sussex's fragile empire to its core. News travels fast, but when it comes to the royal family, it travels with a magnitude and intensity that few can truly comprehend. The alleged scandal involving Meghan Markle and the potential sale of Diana's jewelry collection did not remain confined to Montecito. Within hours, whispers in private royal corridors became urgent conversations. Within days, the story had ignited shockwaves that reached Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and estates across the United Kingdom. The royal family was forced to confront a crisis that was deeply personal, extraordinarily sensitive, and explosively public, all at once. The reactions were a mixture of disbelief, anger, and an almost palpable sense of betrayal, because to them, these weren't just jewels. They were sacred pieces of family history, each one carrying the memory of Princess Diana, the late Princess of Wales. King Charles III was among the first to learn of the allegations. Known for his careful, measured approach to family matters, he reportedly received the news with a mixture of astonishment and quiet fury. According to palace insiders, Charles viewed Diana's jewelry not merely as ornaments, but as tangible symbols of the legacy he had pledged to preserve. The idea that any member of the Sussex household could exploit or commodify these treasures was, in his mind, inconceivable. His first reaction was to summon aides, seeking verification and a clear understanding of the situation. Every detail mattered: the time frame, the method by which Meghan allegedly attempted to sell the items, and the potential impact on the family's reputation. This was no longer a private dispute between Harry and Meghan. It had become a test of loyalty, trust, and the preservation of legacy. Prince William's reaction was sharper, more visceral. To him, the alleged act went beyond betrayal. It touched upon a wound that never fully healed: the death of his mother, Diana. William had always been protective of her memory, and the thought that anyone might exploit her personal belongings sent a shiver of anger through him. Friends close to William reported that he considered the situation utterly unacceptable and insisted on being briefed in full before making any public or private moves. William's position was clear: he would defend Diana's legacy, and he would ensure that any attempt to misuse her possessions would be met with immediate consequences. The tension between William and Harry, long simmering due to past disagreements, reached a new peak as William struggled to reconcile his love for his brother with the gravity of the alleged act. Princess, and often described as the most forthright member of the royal family, reportedly took an unflinching approach. She reportedly demanded immediate clarification from palace staff and private advisors, stressing that the integrity of Diana's legacy was non-negotiable. Her reaction was practical yet cutting. She is known for her ability to cut through dramatics and focus on facts, and she insisted that no action or inaction could allow the situation to fester. Anne's decisiveness was noted as a stabilizing force amid what many insiders described as the most volatile family crisis in decades. Prince Harry, meanwhile, was caught between his own outrage and his instinct to shield Meghan from complete public scrutiny. Insiders suggest that his attempts to mediate or defend Meghan privately were complicated by the weight of the betrayal he perceived. Harry had spent his adult life navigating media scrutiny, family expectations, and the shadow of Diana's legacy. To see his spouse allegedly mishandle something so personal triggered a storm of conflicting emotions: loyalty, anger, grief, and guilt. Harry's inner conflict played out behind closed doors, with aides reporting long, tear-filled conversations that alternated between pleading and confrontation. The palace communications team immediately swung into action. Every word, every leak, every report had the potential to ignite a media firestorm. Sources reveal that communication strategists worked overtime, drafting statements that balanced outrage with restraint. They sought to emphasize the sanctity of the royal collection, the irreversibility of betrayal, and the ongoing internal investigations, all while carefully avoiding language that might appear to vilify Harry or Meghan outright. Timing, phrasing, and the potential for misinterpretation were considered at every turn, reflecting the high stakes involved in protecting the monarchy's image. Outside Buckingham Palace, rumors and reports began to circulate. Tabloids were quick to seize upon the story, crafting headlines that magnified every detail, factual or otherwise. Phrases like jewelry heist, Montecito scandal, and Diana's legacy in danger flooded the media, leaving the family in a constant state of damage control. Advisors cautioned the royal family to maintain silence in public, knowing that every word could be twisted into fodder for gossip. Meanwhile, within private circles, conversations were intense, with family members weighing the appropriate response. Would Harry face reprimands? Would Meghan be ostracized? And how could the legacy of Diana be safeguarded in the face of global attention? Interviews with palace insiders suggest that the family's response was not uniform. Some, like Charles and William, leaned toward decisive action, advocating for immediate protective measures for the jewelry. Others, such as Harry's close allies, urged caution, fearing that an overly harsh response might fracture the family further and fuel public criticism. The dynamic created an internal tug-of-war, where every decision was measured not only against morality and loyalty, but also against optics, public perception, and long-term consequences. Even minor royals felt the ripple effects. Cousins, aunts, and distant relatives reportedly found themselves fielding questions, navigating delicate conversations, and attempting to clarify their positions. Invitations were withdrawn, dinners were postponed, and private meetings were held to ensure everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. The alleged jewelry scandal had, within days, become a crisis encompassing the entire royal family, touching every member with the weight of expectation, history, and legacy. As the family strategized, emotions ran high. Loyalty to Diana's memory was the common thread, but perspectives diverged sharply on how to handle Meghan and Harry. Some advocated for reconciliation and private mediation. Others pushed for strict measures, including the potential removal of privileges or even temporary separation from royal affairs. Every discussion carried the unspoken acknowledgement that once public attention escalated, no decision would remain private for long. The media frenzy only intensified the urgency. With every leaked conversation and unverified report, the palace recognized that time was of the essence. Advisors emphasized the need for a unified front, a statement that would convey moral authority without feeding the scandal further. Experts on crisis management within the monarchy reportedly worked to draft potential courses of action, weighing the repercussions of each and preparing contingencies for media backlash. One of the most contentious debates within the royal circle was whether Harry himself had shared any information externally. Insiders suggested that some family members feared leaks could amplify Meghan's alleged involvement, potentially tarnishing the family name while protecting neither legacy nor relationships. The question of trust within the family, especially between the brothers, became as pressing as the question of the jewelry itself. Could Harry be relied upon to act in the family's best interest, or had loyalty fractured irreparably? By the end of the week, it became clear that the family's response would be decisive and multi-layered. Legal consultations, private conversations, and strategic communications all converged to address the scandal at its root. Protective measures for Diana's collection were enacted, restrictions on Meghan's access were considered, and the internal narrative was carefully curated to ensure the public understood the gravity without inflaming tensions further. This chapter in the Montecito saga highlighted not only the importance of legacy in the royal family, but also the intricate web of trust, loyalty, and emotion that governs their private lives. The reactions were a study in contrasts: anger balanced by caution, grief mitigated by protocol, and familial love challenged by betrayal. As the world watched, the royal family maneuvered delicately, ensuring that the memory of Diana remained untarnished while navigating a crisis that threatened both personal bonds and public perception. The aftermath of these reactions would set the stage for the next explosive developments: the legal maneuvers, public statements, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that would redefine Harry and Meghan's standing within the royal framework, and perhaps within their own relationship. The moment the news of the alleged jewelry scandal reached Buckingham Palace, the gears of royal legal machinery began to turn. In the corridors of power, there was no time for hesitation. Every second carried weight, every decision had consequences, and every move could be scrutinized under the global media's relentless gaze. Legal advisors were summoned immediately, tasked with evaluating the extent of Meghan Markle's alleged actions, assessing potential liabilities, and crafting strategies that would both protect the royal family and assert control over the narrative. The palace understood that this was not merely a family dispute. This was a potential legal and reputational crisis that demanded precision, discretion, and preemptive action. From the onset, the primary concern was safeguarding Princess Diana's legacy, particularly her jewelry collection, which was not only immensely valuable but also deeply symbolic. These pieces, each with a history and story, represented decades of family heritage and public memory. Advisors recommended immediate physical measures, secure storage in reinforced vaults, the employment of additional security personnel, and rigorous auditing of all access points. Trusted courtiers and legal representatives were tasked with overseeing these procedures, ensuring that the jewels were not only protected from external threats, but also monitored internally. Each move was meticulously documented, creating a paper trail that could be referenced in any potential legal disputes. The legal team's strategy encompassed both preventive and reactive measures. Preventive steps included drafting formal letters to Meghan Markle's legal representatives, clearly outlining the royal family's position and the consequences of any attempt to sell or exploit the jewelry collection. The language was precise, designed to assert authority while leaving room for negotiation, reflecting the palace's dual objectives: protect the legacy and avoid unnecessary public confrontation. According to insider reports, these letters emphasized the non-negotiable nature of Diana's possessions, the potential for criminal prosecution if tampering or unauthorized sale occurred, and the moral imperative of preserving historical artifacts. Reactive measures were equally detailed. Legal experts prepared for potential scenarios: public disclosure by Meghan, defamation claims, or unauthorized media leaks. Each scenario had a pre-drafted response protocol, including statements for palace spokespeople, talking points for sympathetic allies in media circles, and contingency plans for rapid court filings if necessary. Sources indicate that the legal team worked around the clock, coordinating with private investigators, estate managers, and security consultants to ensure no angle was left unexamined. Every potential loophole was considered, every contingency planned. One of the most complex challenges was the question of jurisdiction. While Meghan resided in Montecito, California, the collection itself had historical ties to the United Kingdom. Legal advisors had to navigate international laws, understanding how British heritage protection statutes intersected with American property law. Discussions reportedly involved cross-border legal specialists, ensuring that the palace's position could be enforced even if attempts were made to relocate, sell, or conceal any items. The intricacies were immense, as the legal framework had to consider both civil and criminal ramifications, as well as potential media scrutiny in two continents. In addition to these technical legal concerns, the palace recognized the importance of optics. Every letter, filing, and statement was drafted not only with legal precision but also with public perception in mind. The monarchy is as much a symbol as it is an institution, and in a world dominated by social media and 24-hour news cycles, perception can often carry as much weight as the law itself. Advisors ensured that communications would convey strength, integrity, and commitment to heritage without appearing overly punitive or vindictive. They understood that the family's reputation, painstakingly cultivated over generations, was at stake. Prince William and King Charles III played a direct role in shaping the legal approach. William, in particular, was reported to be intensely involved, reviewing correspondence, approving strategic decisions, and ensuring that the family's interests were fully represented. His involvement signaled both the gravity of the situation and the necessity of a unified front. King Charles, balancing personal anger with the need for procedural accuracy, emphasized that the legal response must be comprehensive yet measured, reflecting the monarchy's commitment to justice and legacy preservation. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's legal team, aware of the escalating situation, reportedly began preparing its own defense. Sources suggest that their strategy involved framing any actions regarding the jewelry as misunderstandings or miscommunications rather than intentional misconduct. They considered emphasizing Meghan's charitable intentions or her perceived role as a steward of Diana's legacy. While details remain murky, insiders note that Meghan's team recognized the magnitude of the palace's response and the risk of severe reputational damage, which could extend beyond personal consequences to affect her public image, media contracts, and philanthropic initiatives. Negotiations behind closed doors reportedly involved multiple layers of dialogue. Mediators and legal liaisons facilitated conversations between the palace and Meghan's representatives, seeking to resolve disputes without escalating to public litigation. These talks were tense, often described as high-stakes chess, with each party maneuvering carefully to assert authority, protect assets, and preserve dignity. The palace insisted on strict compliance with security protocols, immediate accounting of any items in Meghan's possession, and written guarantees that no unauthorized sales would occur. Meghan's team, on the other hand, aimed to retain flexibility and control over narrative framing, aware that any concession could be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing. The potential for criminal investigation was also a consideration. Legal advisors examined whether any actions could constitute theft, fraud, or unauthorized sale of property, and whether reporting to authorities might be necessary. While the palace initially favored private resolution, they understood that failure to act decisively could invite accusations of negligence or complicity. The balance between legal prudence and discretion required constant recalibration, as every decision had implications both within and outside the royal household. Security protocols expanded in parallel with legal maneuvers. Palace insiders describe a heightened presence of trusted security personnel at key estates, continuous monitoring of sensitive areas, and rigorous vetting of staff with access to valuable collections. Measures included biometric scans, surveillance systems, and secure inventories, ensuring that every item was accounted for at all times. These steps, while protective, also sent a clear signal. The palace would not tolerate breaches of trust or attempts to exploit its heritage. During this period, advisors also considered reputational management on multiple fronts. Public relations experts were engaged to coordinate messaging, anticipating potential leaks, and preparing preemptive statements for media outlets. Every word was scrutinized to avoid misrepresentation, while emphasizing the monarchy's commitment to ethical stewardship and historical preservation. Insider accounts indicate that this phase of the crisis involved a delicate dance, assertive legal action intertwined with carefully managed public communication to maintain credibility and authority. The combined legal and protective efforts represented an unprecedented mobilization of the monarchy's resources. Specialists in law, security, communications, and heritage management collaborated around the clock, illustrating the seriousness with which the palace approached the crisis. By coordinating these efforts, the royal family sought to create a robust, multi-layered defense capable of addressing the situation comprehensively. Despite the careful planning, the pressure on Harry and Meghan was immense. Legal notices, private investigations, and increasing scrutiny created tension that infiltrated both their personal and public lives. Sources indicate that the couple struggled to navigate the restrictions, deadlines, and demands imposed by the palace, fueling both emotional strain and strategic maneuvering. Every interaction, from correspondence to private meetings, carried the weight of potential legal implications. The palace's approach demonstrated both authority and adaptability. Legal and security measures were designed not just to respond to immediate threats, but also to anticipate future contingencies, including potential leaks, media spin, and public reaction. Each action was calculated to preserve the integrity of Diana's legacy while upholding the broader reputation of the monarchy. This comprehensive approach reflected decades of experience in navigating crises, combining rigorous legal frameworks with nuanced understanding of public perception. By the end of this initial phase, the royal family had established a tightly controlled perimeter of legal, physical, and reputational safeguards. Security was heightened, communications were carefully monitored, and legal measures were firmly in place. The palace had asserted its authority decisively, signaling that attempts to undermine or exploit the royal legacy would face immediate and robust consequences. The groundwork was laid for ongoing negotiations, potential litigation, and public clarification, ensuring that the family retained control over both tangible assets and public narrative. This chapter underscored the lengths to which the monarchy would go to protect its heritage and maintain authority. Legal maneuvers, combined with protective actions, demonstrated a meticulous, multidimensional response designed to address both the present crisis and future contingencies. The implications were clear. The palace would not hesitate to act decisively to preserve trust, legacy, and reputation, even in the face of personal and public turmoil. The next stage of this saga would see the story spill further into public consciousness. As media scrutiny intensified, social narratives emerged, and the royal family prepared for a confrontation that was as much about perception as it was about property. The legal groundwork laid in this chapter would prove essential in navigating the storm, ensuring that Diana's legacy remained untarnished and that the monarchy's authority endured despite unprecedented internal conflict. As news of the palace's legal maneuvers regarding the alleged jewelry scandal began to seep into the public domain, the global media erupted in a way that few could have predicted. From tabloids in London to high-end outlets in New York, journalists, pundits, and social media commentators scrambled to cover every angle, every whispered rumor, and every speculative assertion. Within hours, the story dominated headlines, trending topics, and talk shows, and the palace's calculated discretion was juxtaposed against the chaotic, unpredictable force of public perception. Suddenly, what had been a carefully controlled legal and protective operation was being consumed and interpreted through the unfiltered lens of global scrutiny. The first reports, sourced from unnamed insiders and leaked documents, portrayed a dramatic narrative. Meghan Markle allegedly attempting to maneuver Diana's priceless jewelry into her own control, with the palace responding decisively to prevent loss or misuse. Media outlets competed to sensationalize each detail, emphasizing confrontation, betrayal, and family conflict. Headlines varied from cautious reportage to outright scandal-mongering, with phrases designed to evoke shock and outrage. Royal legacy at risk, Diana's jewelry targeted, Palace versus Meghan, inside the crisis. Each story added fuel to the fire, shaping public perception in ways that were impossible for the palace to entirely manage. Television networks immediately seized on the story, dedicating panels and special segments to analyze the unfolding drama. Royal experts, cultural commentators, and celebrity pundits dissected every known detail, often drawing on conjecture and speculative interpretation. Social media amplified the frenzy exponentially. Clips from daytime talk shows, short-form video recaps, and viral memes created a constant feedback loop, reinforcing public interest and speculation. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram were saturated with hot takes, while YouTube channels covering royal news saw unprecedented spikes in viewership. Hashtags referencing the situation trended globally, with some posts generating millions of interactions in a matter of hours. The palace, aware of the volatility of the media environment, took a cautious but proactive approach. Press briefings were minimal, controlled, and carefully worded. Statements emphasized the protection of Diana's legacy, the importance of safeguarding historical artifacts, and the family's commitment to ethical stewardship. There was a deliberate avoidance of personal attacks, name-calling, or direct engagement with speculation, reflecting a long-standing royal protocol. Maintain dignity, avoid escalation, and let the facts speak through legal and procedural channels. Despite these efforts, misinformation proliferated rapidly. Social media users, bloggers, and freelance journalists contributed to a torrent of narrative variations, some bordering on outright fabrication. Allegations of internal palace feuds, secret meetings, and undisclosed financial dealings circulated widely. Even mainstream outlets, in their haste to compete for clicks and viewership, occasionally repeated unverified claims, further complicating the palace's communication strategy. Insider reports noted that advisors spent hours correcting misrepresentations, issuing clarifications, and guiding media correspondents on verified details. However, the velocity of public discourse often outpaced the ability to control it. Public reaction was as complex as it was intense. Royal watchers, long invested in the lives of Diana, Charles, William, Harry, and Meghan, engaged in heated debates online and offline. Sentiments ranged from shock and anger to sympathy and defense, often influenced by prior opinions on Meghan Markle, her relationship with Prince Harry, and perceptions of the royal family. Polling data gathered during the first 48 hours suggested a polarizing effect. Segments of the public sided firmly with the palace, emphasizing heritage preservation and institutional integrity, while others questioned Meghan's intentions, speculating on motives ranging from personal enrichment to media attention. The story became a mirror reflecting broader societal attitudes toward celebrity, royalty, and family dynamics. As the coverage intensified, journalists began uncovering additional layers of the story. Investigative pieces explored Diana's jewelry collection in detail, recounting historical acquisitions, auctions, and the cultural significance of each piece. Reports highlighted past disputes over inheritance, estate management, and prior attempts to sell or display royal assets. This context fueled further discussion, providing both the public and media commentators with material to frame the situation as a continuation of long-standing familial tension rather than an isolated incident. The narrative became more layered and complex, with the palace positioned as the guardian of history and Meghan Markle cast as the disruptive figure, regardless of her actual actions. The interplay between traditional media and new digital platforms created unique challenges. While newspapers and broadcast outlets could be briefed and managed to some extent, social media offered a decentralized, uncontrollable flow of content. Memes, fan-made videos, reaction posts, and viral threads shaped narratives in ways that could be impossible to anticipate. Advisors reportedly monitored millions of online mentions, tracking sentiment, identifying viral content, and assessing reputational impact. Digital analysts provided real-time updates to palace officials, enabling reactive adjustments to public statements and messaging strategies. However, the sheer scale of online discussion meant that controlling perception entirely was a near-impossible task. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's team leveraged the media landscape to present their own narrative. Interviews with sympathetic journalists, controlled social media posts, and carefully placed statements sought to contextualize her actions as motivated by concern for Diana's legacy and personal security rather than self-interest. Publicists emphasized charitable intentions, heritage preservation, and familial loyalty, seeking to counteract allegations of misconduct. The tension between the palace's communication strategy and Meghan's media efforts created a high-stakes battle over narrative framing. with both sides vying to influence public opinion, legal outcomes, and long-term reputational standing. International coverage added another layer of complexity. Outlets from Europe, North America, and Asia reported the story with regional nuances, reflecting local perceptions of monarchy, celebrity, and cultural heritage. Analysts noted that certain audiences interpreted the events through broader lenses. For some, this was a story of power and legacy. For others, it was a tale of wealth, entitlement, and media manipulation. Royal experts from various countries provided commentary on tradition, protocol, and the legal mechanisms employed, further amplifying the global attention and creating a multifaceted discourse that intertwined local values with universal curiosity. The story's social consequences were immediate and visible. Public debates extended to forums, online communities, and private social circles. Conversations about ethics, wealth, family responsibility, and media influence proliferated. Many questioned how historical artifacts could become points of contention and what this implied about trust, privilege, and accountability. Educational and cultural commentators used the scandal as a case study in media influence, heritage management, and crisis communication, framing it as a contemporary example of how private family disputes can transform into public spectacles under the glare of global scrutiny. Within the palace, advisors closely monitored not only media coverage but also public sentiment. Weekly briefings on trending topics, sentiment analysis, and editorial framing helped shape ongoing communication strategies. These insights informed both proactive and reactive measures, ensuring that public perception could be managed alongside legal and security operations. Palace insiders emphasized that maintaining a sense of control, even amid the overwhelming flood of media attention, was essential for preserving both authority and dignity. As days turned into weeks, the story evolved continuously. New leaks, additional reports, and social media discussions extended the life cycle of the scandal far beyond the initial incident. Analysts noted that sustained public engagement was fueled not only by curiosity, but also by emotional investment. Audiences were invested in characters, motivations, and outcomes. The narrative's human drama, alleged betrayal, family tension, and legal conflict resonated widely, ensuring that the story remained at the forefront of media cycles and social discourse. The public fallout had tangible implications. Merchants reported increased sales of memorabilia related to Diana, Harry, and Meghan, while media outlets experienced record engagement on articles and videos. Bookings for royal-themed tours and exhibitions surged, capitalizing on renewed fascination with historical jewelry and royal heritage. Conversely, some sponsors and philanthropic partners expressed concern over association with a highly controversial narrative, highlighting the intersection of reputation, commerce, and public perception. The story's impact extended far beyond headlines, influencing economic, cultural, and social spheres in measurable ways. Ultimately, the media frenzy transformed the jewelry scandal from an internal palace matter into a global cultural phenomenon. Public opinion, amplified by relentless coverage and social media discourse, became an active participant in the unfolding saga. The palace's legal and protective measures, while critical, were now complemented and complicated by the unpredictable force of public perception. Each statement, clarification, or denial was dissected, shared, and debated, making the management of narrative as crucial as the management of assets. The palace, while maintaining a disciplined and calculated approach, recognized the power of perception. Legal authority could dictate access and control over physical assets, but the court of public opinion required a different form of strategy, one that combined transparency, narrative framing, and the careful modulation of information. Advisors and spokespeople worked tirelessly to ensure that the monarchy remained perceived as principled, ethical, and protective of legacy, even amidst a maelstrom of scrutiny, speculation, and sensationalism. In parallel, Meghan Markle faced unprecedented pressure. Her reputation, previously managed in controlled media appearances, was now subject to daily scrutiny across countless platforms. Every comment, social media post, and appearance was analyzed, critiqued, and contextualized. The intense focus required her team to constantly adapt messaging, craft preemptive narratives, and monitor emerging threats to her public image. Despite her previous experience with media coverage, the scale and intensity of this situation were extraordinary, testing both resilience and strategy. As the media frenzy and public fallout continued, the story became not only about a single alleged scandal, but about broader themes. Legacy versus ambition, tradition versus modernity, family loyalty versus personal agency, and control versus perception. The palace's actions and Meghan Markle's responses were interpreted not merely as isolated events, but as symbolic markers in a wider cultural discourse. Each development contributed to a narrative that extended beyond the immediate parties, inviting global audiences to weigh in, judge, and emotionally invest in the unfolding. As the media storm reached its peak, the palace's security apparatus was operating at a level few outside the royal inner circle could even begin to comprehend. The alleged jewelry scandal had triggered not only a legal and public relations crisis, but also a full-scale security evaluation. Advisors, courtiers, and specialized royal security personnel coordinated around the clock, implementing measures to safeguard the physical integrity of the estate, the privacy of the royal family, and the integrity of highly valuable assets. It was a delicate balancing act, ensuring protection while maintaining discretion, avoiding public alarm, and allowing the monarchy to continue functioning without the appearance of overreach or panic. Security teams expanded their surveillance perimeter, using both visible and covert measures. Guards patrolled corridors previously considered low risk, with specialized units monitoring entry points and archival rooms where Diana's jewels and sensitive documents were stored. Access protocols were tightened, and comprehensive audits of all individuals entering these areas were conducted. Even senior staff underwent additional vetting, and the palace's IT infrastructure was reinforced to prevent digital leaks. Every move, every meeting, and every decision was logged meticulously, reflecting the high stakes involved. Palace insiders emphasized that the goal was not only to prevent theft or loss, but also to safeguard the perception of the monarchy's authority, control, and dignity in the public eye. Meanwhile, internal intelligence operations were ramped up to track any unauthorized communications or potential leaks. Analysts reviewed phone records, emails, and messaging patterns within the palace network. Suspicious interactions were flagged and investigated, with several minor staff members temporarily restricted from access pending review. Security protocols extended beyond the palace itself. Advisors liaised with external agencies, including private investigative firms and national law enforcement, ensuring coordination in case of potential threats or breaches. Confidentiality agreements were reviewed, and all personnel handling sensitive materials were reminded of the legal consequences of violations. The situation required strategic discretion. While visible security measures such as uniformed guards, camera installations, and controlled access points were essential, much of the operational activity occurred behind the scenes. Security teams rotated shifts, maintained round-the-clock surveillance, and used advanced technology to track both personnel and asset movement. Even routine events, such as family dinners or meetings, were conducted with security contingencies in place. Advisors emphasized that the palace's reputation depended as much on the perception of stability as on actual protection. Any breach, real or perceived, could magnify public scrutiny and undermine trust in the institution. Within this environment, palace officials also engaged in extensive scenario planning. Contingency plans accounted for potential legal developments, media escalations, and even physical confrontations over disputed assets. Specialists were brought in to simulate possible crises, evaluate response efficiency, and identify vulnerabilities. These exercises were designed to prepare staff for high-pressure situations, allowing the palace to respond rapidly without compromising protocol or appearance. Each hypothetical scenario considered not only immediate safety, but also long-term consequences for public perception, financial stability, and family cohesion. The coordination between legal counsel, communications advisors, and security personnel became increasingly sophisticated. Lawyers and estate managers provided real-time updates on legal proceedings and asset documentation, ensuring that security measures aligned with legal priorities. Simultaneously, Communications teams monitored press coverage and social media trends, advising security teams on potential risks associated with public exposure or unauthorized photography. The goal was to anticipate not only physical threats, but also reputational risks, blending traditional security with modern media awareness. Amid this heightened vigilance, discreet palace meetings were convened to evaluate internal allegiances, clarify chain-of-command responsibilities, and reinforce loyalty among senior staff. Courtiers and key personnel were briefed individually on evolving protocols and expected conduct. Some were asked to provide sworn statements regarding access to sensitive materials, while others participated in confidential discussions about contingency measures. The aim was to maintain operational security without creating fear or tension that could itself become a source of leaks or public concern. The palace's response extended beyond the immediate estate. Royal residences, guest accommodations, and venues slated for upcoming events were reviewed for vulnerabilities. Mobile security units were deployed for travel schedules, ensuring that any movement of family members, sensitive assets, or official documents remained protected. Logistics were carefully synchronized to prevent overlaps, gaps, or conflicts that could compromise safety. Advisors emphasized that each action needed to appear routine and unobtrusive, avoiding any impression of panic that might attract media attention or inspire opportunistic breaches. Parallel to these operations, the palace maintained a layer of intelligence gathering focused on external actors. Investigators monitored media outlets, social media influencers, and private investigators who might seek to capitalize on the scandal. Potential threats were assessed, including attempts to photograph or access assets during public events, infiltrate staff networks, or leak sensitive documents. Intelligence analysts created daily briefings for senior officials, highlighting patterns of behavior, emerging risks, and suggested preventive measures. These updates informed both security protocols and strategic communication decisions, ensuring that every action reinforced the palace's protective posture. The combination of legal, media, and security pressures created a uniquely challenging environment. Staff were tasked with navigating multiple priorities simultaneously, protecting heritage, managing public perception, ensuring physical security, and adhering to the expectations of royal protocol. Stress levels were high, and fatigue became a concern, prompting the introduction of rotational shifts, mental health support, and rest periods for personnel working long hours under intense scrutiny. Advisors recognized that operational efficiency depended not only on strategy, but also on the well-being and morale of the staff executing complex measures. In parallel, the palace maintained engagement with external experts in jewelry valuation, historical preservation, and crisis management. Specialists provided advice on handling sensitive assets, documenting provenance, and mitigating potential damage in case of disputes or mishandling. These consultants worked in confidential settings, ensuring that their guidance remained shielded from media leaks while informing both security and legal strategies. Their input was essential in aligning protective measures with professional best practices, providing an additional layer of authority and expertise. Amid the operational intensity, key decisions were made about asset access and internal transparency. Only a limited number of trusted individuals were allowed to handle or even view Diana's jewelry. Each interaction was documented meticulously, with security logs noting personnel, time, and purpose. Access keys, digital credentials, and archival permissions were regularly audited. This rigorous oversight minimized risk and established accountability, reinforcing the palace's capacity to maintain control under extraordinary circumstances. Even ceremonial aspects of palace life were adjusted to accommodate heightened security. Events traditionally open to certain staff, dignitaries, or guests were scaled back, and circulation routes were modified to limit exposure to sensitive areas. Protocol officers worked closely with security teams to ensure that changes remained consistent with royal etiquette, avoiding disruption of the monarchy's public image. Advisors balanced the need for protection with the necessity of continuity, maintaining appearances while implementing behind-the-scenes modifications. The heightened security environment also affected family dynamics. Meghan Markle's movements, interactions, and public appearances were carefully monitored and coordinated. Security teams ensured that any engagement involving high-profile family members accounted for potential risks, from opportunistic media intrusion to physical threats. Coordinators developed real-time contingency plans for public events, including evacuation routes, secure transport, and rapid response measures. Even seemingly routine visits or meetings were accompanied by extensive logistical planning, reflecting the extraordinary level of precaution necessitated by the scandal. Internally, the palace also reviewed communication flows. Staff were instructed to avoid informal discussions about sensitive topics, to encrypt digital correspondence, and to report any unusual requests or anomalies immediately. Audits of email, phone, and messaging systems were conducted to detect potential breaches. Information was compartmentalized, ensuring that no single individual possessed knowledge of the full scope of operations. This approach minimized risk while maintaining operational efficiency, reflecting lessons learned from prior high-profile incidents in royal history. The palace's legal team coordinated closely with security to enforce court orders, protect assets, and document compliance. When sensitive documents or materials were transported for legal review, security protocols ensured both the physical integrity and confidentiality of the process. Couriers, archival staff, and legal representatives followed strict procedures, with multiple checks and redundancies. This meticulous attention to detail was designed not only to prevent unauthorized access, but also to demonstrate due diligence in case of future legal scrutiny. Coordination with law enforcement became increasingly sophisticated. The palace liaised with national authorities to monitor potential criminal activity, ensure compliance with legal standards, and manage incidents involving unauthorized access or attempted theft. Law enforcement agencies provided tactical guidance, intelligence support, and rapid response capabilities. While the palace retained operational independence, these collaborations reinforced security measures and ensured that all actions were consistent with legal frameworks and public expectations. Through it all, a central theme emerged. Control of the narrative, security of assets, and protection of family were inseparable. Every decision regarding physical security was informed by public perception. Every communication strategy considered potential threats. Every operational adjustment was made with legal and media consequences in mind. The palace's approach reflected a holistic understanding of crisis management, integrating security, legal, and communication strategies into a single coordinated framework. As days turned into weeks, the palace's meticulous planning began to show results. No major breaches occurred, the jewelry remained secure, and staff continued to navigate intense pressure without incident. Legal proceedings moved forward with documentation supporting the palace's position, while media coverage, although relentless, began to shift toward analysis of procedural fairness and historical context rather than raw speculation. Advisors noted that maintaining composure, operational discipline, and strategic discretion had preserved both physical security and the monarchy's broader authority. However, the complexity of the situation underscored one unalterable truth. In an age of instantaneous global communication, no palace, even one steeped in centuries of tradition, could completely control information, perception, or interpretation. Security measures could protect assets, legal action could enforce rights, but public opinion, amplified by social media and relentless media coverage, remained an uncontrollable force. The palace had to navigate a delicate balance between authority and visibility, discretion and transparency, tradition and modernity, all while ensuring that the legacy of Diana, the integrity of the family, and the security of assets. As the palace's security and operational strategies unfolded behind closed doors, the legal machinery moved into full swing, bringing with it a level of intensity and complexity few outside the monarchy could fully grasp. What had begun as a public relations and security concern had now metastasized into a tangled web of lawsuits, subpoenas, and investigative inquiries that threatened to entangle not only staff and advisors, but also members of the royal family themselves. Legal teams from multiple jurisdictions were now actively coordinating, each action scrutinized for both immediate impact and potential long-term consequences. The situation demanded precision, foresight, and a constant awareness of how every move could reverberate through the media, courtrooms, and public consciousness. The initial filings had set a precedent. Questions of ownership, provenance, and rightful custody over Diana's jewelry and private documents were at the heart of the legal disputes. Lawyers representing various stakeholders meticulously cataloged each item, tracing its history, verifying authenticity, and documenting chain-of-custody records. Every discrepancy, however minor, could be leveraged to support claims or discredit opposing arguments. Court-appointed experts in gemology, historical artifacts, and royal estate management were brought in to provide objective assessments, their reports forming a critical foundation for legal arguments. The stakes were astronomical, not only in terms of the monetary value of the items, but also in terms of the symbolic authority and historical integrity they represented. Simultaneously, the palace's internal legal team worked tirelessly to reinforce protective measures and safeguard privileged communications. Confidentiality agreements were reviewed, revised, and reissued. Non-disclosure agreements were extended to cover individuals who previously operated outside direct oversight, but whose proximity to sensitive matters could present a liability. In tandem, the legal team coordinated with security officers to ensure that the physical handling of materials was fully compliant with court standards. Each transfer of jewelry or sensitive documents was logged, witnessed, and, when possible, video recorded to preempt any claims of mishandling. High-profile lawyers with expertise in international law were brought in to address the cross-border dimensions of the case. Some of the disputed assets had previously been loaned for exhibitions abroad or held temporarily in foreign storage facilities. Each transaction required careful examination of local laws, tax implications, and potential exposure to foreign litigation. Lawyers analyzed treaties, historical precedents, and case law to construct airtight arguments defending the palace's control over these assets. They also prepared counterclaims against any party attempting to assert ownership without proper documentation, ensuring that the monarchy's legal stance remained unassailable in multiple jurisdictions. The interplay between legal and media strategy became increasingly sophisticated. Court filings were timed to influence the narrative subtly, without overtly appearing manipulative. Press releases were coordinated to coincide with key hearings or document submissions, framing the palace's actions as responsible, deliberate, and respectful of legal protocols. Legal advisors and communications teams worked in tandem, understanding that in the modern age, public perception could influence judicial proceedings, especially in high-profile cases that attracted international attention. The monarchy's legal team had to be vigilant not only in adhering to legal norms, but also in managing how those actions were interpreted by an attentive and often critical media landscape. Multiple hearings were scheduled across different courts, each requiring exhaustive preparation. Witnesses were prepped extensively, with their testimony carefully aligned to reinforce the palace's narrative without revealing unnecessary operational details. Security personnel coordinated with legal advisors to ensure that sensitive information, anything that could compromise asset protection or family safety, remained undisclosed. Every document submitted was cross-checked against internal logs, ensuring consistency and completeness. Even minor errors could be exploited, so the level of attention to detail reached a level bordering on obsession. Parallel to these formal proceedings, behind-the-scenes negotiations and mediation efforts were underway. The palace's legal team explored settlement options with some claimants to avoid protracted litigation that could expose sensitive family matters or historical archives to public scrutiny. Private discussions were conducted under strict confidentiality, with intermediaries facilitating dialogue between the palace and potential adversaries. Each negotiation was approached strategically, weighing the benefits of resolution against the risk of appearing vulnerable or conceding authority. These discussions often involved multiple rounds of offers and counteroffers, reflecting a careful calibration of risk, reputation, and financial implications. Amid these formal and informal legal maneuvers, the palace faced unprecedented pressure from a variety of external entities. Media conglomerates, investigative journalists, and high-profile documentarians sought access to evidence or exclusive commentary. Every interaction carried legal ramifications, and advisors meticulously guided responses to prevent inadvertent disclosures. Legal counsel reviewed every statement, ensuring that even offhand remarks could not be construed as admissions or undermining the palace's position. The palace effectively operated as both a legal entity and a media entity simultaneously, with overlapping obligations and constraints. The complexity of the litigation extended to the family's private contracts and agreements. Staff members with access to Diana's personal belongings or to sensitive information had signed binding agreements that were now under renewed scrutiny. Lawyers evaluated the enforceability of these contracts, the scope of employee responsibilities, and potential liability for breaches. Internal investigations were launched to verify compliance, and minor discrepancies were documented to establish a pattern of diligence or, in some cases, to address lapses proactively. The palace's legal team recognized that maintaining control over historical materials required constant vigilance, ensuring that no individual could inadvertently or deliberately compromise the family's interests. Financial implications added another layer of complexity. The valuation of the disputed assets, including jewelry, correspondence, and private memorabilia, was conducted using independent experts. Each item was assessed not only for its market value but also for its historical and symbolic significance. Legal arguments referenced these valuations to justify claims and preempt challenges. Trust structures, insurance policies, and estate planning documents were reviewed in parallel to ensure that protective measures aligned with financial realities. The intersection of law, finance, and heritage created a multidimensional legal landscape that demanded continuous oversight and coordination. Court-appointed investigators and auditors were actively reviewing palace operations. Every internal protocol, record of handling valuable items, and chain-of-command decision-making process came under examination. Palace advisors ensured that staff could provide accurate, verifiable information without exposing vulnerabilities. Legal teams meticulously documented these processes, anticipating that any omission or inconsistency could be leveraged by opposing counsel. The scrutiny was intense, and the pressure on both personnel and family members was palpable, but careful preparation allowed the palace to maintain composure in the face of sustained external evaluation. The litigation also exposed underlying tensions among stakeholders. Some long-standing staff members expressed frustration at increased scrutiny and procedural changes, while external claimants seized every opportunity to challenge authority or assert ownership claims. The palace's legal team had to navigate not only the formalities of the courtroom, but also interpersonal dynamics, ensuring that disputes among allies did not compromise the broader legal strategy. Diplomacy, persuasion, and careful management of relationships became as critical as the legal arguments themselves. Meanwhile, the legal spotlight forced palace officials to reconcile operational secrecy with transparency obligations. Regulatory bodies and courts demanded documentation, explanations, and evidence to validate claims and protective measures. Advisors coordinated the compilation of exhaustive reports detailing security protocols, chain of custody records, and compliance measures. These submissions were designed to satisfy legal requirements without revealing operational tactics or compromising ongoing investigations. Each document served dual purposes, establishing legal credibility while preserving the integrity of the palace's protective framework. The public dimension of the legal proceedings could not be ignored. Every hearing, filing, or statement became fodder for global media coverage. Legal advisors understood that public perception could influence the broader narrative, shaping opinions among both international audiences and domestic constituencies. Strategic communications were integrated with legal strategies to reinforce the monarchy's credibility and prudence. Press briefings, official statements, and court filings were carefully coordinated to maintain consistency, projecting control and authority amid a torrent of speculation and sensational reporting. As the legal battles continued, contingency plans were developed for potential escalations. Scenarios included asset seizure requests, injunctions against access, and emergency protective measures if sensitive materials were threatened. Each scenario was examined in detail, with operational, legal, and reputational consequences mapped out. Coordination between legal, security, and communications teams ensured rapid, decisive action could be taken without compromising protocol or public perception. These proactive preparations underscored the palace's commitment to safeguarding both tangible and symbolic assets. In the midst of these proceedings, family members and close advisors were called upon to testify, clarify historical context, and provide insight into established protocols. Their participation required extensive preparation, coaching, and emotional resilience. Legal teams worked to ensure that testimonies reinforced palace claims without exposing unnecessary personal details or vulnerabilities. Witness credibility was paramount, as any perceived inconsistency could be seized upon by opposing counsel to undermine the palace's position. The stakes were not merely financial. They were about authority, reputation, and historical preservation. International observers and stakeholders closely followed the unfolding legal drama. Scholars, historians, and royal commentators weighed in on the implications of each development, analyzing precedent, historical context, and potential long-term ramifications. The palace had to navigate this complex ecosystem carefully, balancing legal obligations with the public's appetite for information and the media's relentless scrutiny. Every statement, every filing, and every procedural move was evaluated not only in terms of legal efficacy, but also in terms of its broader symbolic impact on the monarchy's standing. As the legal web tightened, it became increasingly clear that the stakes went far beyond the material value of the assets or the immediate reputational impact. The proceedings represented a defining moment for the monarchy itself, a test of resilience, strategic acumen, and the capacity to maintain authority under extraordinary pressure. Advisors recognized that the outcome would reverberate for generations, influencing public perception, legal precedent, and the preservation of royal heritage. Every action taken, every argument made, and every decision executed was part of a larger, high-stakes chess game with history, legacy, and power hanging in the balance. The palace's meticulous preparation, coordination between legal, security, and communications teams, and proactive management of both internal and external pressures demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of modern crisis management. The moment the news broke, it was as if a storm had been unleashed across media outlets, social platforms, and private conversations alike. Headlines flashed with urgent proclamations, each one more sensational than the last, as journalists, commentators, and social media influencers scrambled to interpret, amplify, and speculate. The palace had anticipated media scrutiny, but the speed, intensity, and global reach of the coverage exceeded even the most rigorous contingency planning. News cycles churned endlessly, recycling speculation, official statements, and leaked documents in a way that made it feel as though the world was watching in real time, hungry for drama and scandal. The palace communication team recognized immediately that the situation required a delicate balance. They needed to maintain control without appearing evasive, to project authority without alienating public sentiment. Social media erupted almost instantly, platforms flooded with memes, hashtags, and opinion threads dissecting every available detail. Conversations spread like wildfire across continents, with millions weighing in, debating, and reacting emotionally. Some commentators expressed outrage, claiming moral transgressions, while others framed the situation as a continuation of an ongoing pattern of intrigue, secrecy, and high-stakes maneuvering within the royal family. Influencers capitalized on the moment, producing viral content, reaction videos, and analytical breakdowns that amplified public interest. The speed of information flow and the breadth of reach meant that narratives could shift in a matter of hours, requiring the palace to respond swiftly and strategically to preserve credibility. The palace's press office immediately issued carefully worded statements, emphasizing commitment to due process, transparency, and legal compliance. Each sentence was scrutinized, calibrated to reassure the public while leaving room for operational flexibility. They highlighted procedural rigor, historical context, and respect for institutional frameworks, subtly framing the narrative to underscore the monarchy's stability in the midst of turmoil. Legal teams reviewed every statement before release, ensuring alignment with ongoing litigation and security measures, mindful that even a minor misstep could be weaponized by critics. Meanwhile, media outlets sought access to insiders, former staff, and palace advisors. Anonymous sources appeared with details that were sometimes accurate, sometimes distorted, and often strategically timed to coincide with court filings or press statements. The palace faced a dual challenge: managing the flow of information to protect sensitive matters and countering potential misinformation that could undermine public confidence. Rumors about internal conflicts, security breaches, and family disagreements proliferated, each requiring measured acknowledgement or subtle correction to maintain authority without drawing unnecessary attention to operational details. Opinion pieces and editorials began to emerge, some supportive, some critical, and others purely sensationalist. Historians and royal commentators offered analysis of precedents, legal frameworks, and the symbolic importance of the disputed items and actions. The palace recognized that public perception, while intangible, had a direct impact on the broader legitimacy of its authority. Each narrative strand needed to be addressed, either through official statements, controlled media engagement, or indirect messaging designed to influence interpretation without overtly intervening in the discourse. Television networks devoted special segments to dissecting the unfolding events, hosting panels of experts who speculated on motives, outcomes, and historical parallels. Evening news programs ran detailed recaps, mixing archival footage, commentary, and on-the-ground reporting to maintain viewer engagement. Social media snippets and short-form content amplified these narratives further, producing a continuous feedback loop of commentary and audience reaction. The palace's media strategy had to consider this relentless cycle, anticipating how information released at one moment could be repurposed, reshaped, or misinterpreted moments later. The public's emotional investment in the story proved to be as complex as it was intense. On one hand, there was fascination with the internal workings of one of the world's most enduring institutions, fueled by curiosity about personal relationships, hidden documents, and historical legacies. On the other hand, there was moral judgment, with audiences scrutinizing decisions, alliances, and perceived missteps, often projecting their own expectations onto the actions of individuals involved. This dual layer of engagement, curiosity and moral evaluation, created a volatile environment where every detail, no matter how minor, could ignite further discussion, speculation, and controversy. The palace also faced pressure from international observers. Governments, diplomatic entities, and foreign media monitored developments closely, evaluating potential implications for bilateral relations, ceremonial protocols, and public diplomacy. The global attention required careful orchestration of messages and appearances, ensuring that international audiences received a coherent narrative that projected stability, authority, and continuity. Advisors coordinated closely with foreign affairs offices to anticipate questions, manage impressions, and ensure that statements or media appearances did not inadvertently create diplomatic friction. Amid this external storm, the palace had to manage internal morale and public-facing staff. Employees who interacted with media, public audiences, and VIP visitors received intensive briefings on talking points, operational protocols, and messaging boundaries. Training sessions included scenario planning, emphasizing how to respond to speculative or provocative questions without revealing sensitive information. Internal communication channels were used to maintain cohesion, reassure staff, and reinforce a shared understanding of the palace's narrative priorities. These measures were critical, as any deviation or leak could amplify public confusion or fuel negative perceptions. Leaked documents, whether authentic or doctored, added another layer of complexity. Analysts examined metadata, provenance, and context to determine credibility, while media outlets leveraged the documents to create narratives of intrigue, betrayal, and scandal. Every leak prompted a measured response from the palace, balancing the need to assert control, correct misinformation, and reinforce institutional authority. Legal teams often coordinated with communications officers to determine whether pursuing formal actions, such as injunctions or restraining orders, was strategically advantageous or likely to exacerbate public attention. Public engagement continued to evolve, with opinion polls, surveys, and audience feedback providing real-time insight into sentiment trends. The palace used this data to inform messaging strategies, calibrating statements to address emerging concerns, clarify misconceptions, or reinforce positive perceptions. Messaging was tailored for multiple platforms, considering tone, format, and audience demographics. In essence, the palace operated as a 24-hour communications entity, constantly analyzing sentiment, anticipating reactions, and adjusting approaches to maintain credibility and authority amid an environment of unprecedented scrutiny. Political figures and public officials also entered the conversation, weighing in with statements that ranged from neutral commentary to pointed critique. These interventions added pressure on the palace to demonstrate transparency, legitimacy, and procedural fairness. Legal advisors assessed the potential impact of such statements on ongoing litigation, reputation management, and broader public trust, preparing strategies to respond without escalating conflicts or appearing defensive. The palace recognized that the public and political dimensions were intertwined, with each influencing perception of credibility and authority. In the midst of this media maelstrom, the royal family faced personal challenges. Individual members were subject to scrutiny, with public attention intensifying around appearances, statements, and social interactions. Advisors worked to protect family members from intrusive questioning, paparazzi harassment, and social media attacks, balancing the need for visibility with the imperative of safety and privacy. Every public appearance was choreographed with attention to optics, messaging, and risk mitigation. Personal staff were briefed extensively to maintain consistent narratives and prevent inadvertent disclosures that could exacerbate the public storm.